a mutually enforced facade of resolution.
That's the best way of putting it. Mutually enforced facade of resolution. And the really tragic thing about all of this is, again, the Taiwanese people are going to be caught in the middle of this as two superpowers juggle who should have control. Pelosi slams China in op-ed published minutes before she lands in Taiwan. We cannot stand by. Like, I'm sorry, but she's taking very strong words on a trip that her own administration, the Biden administration, is saying this is a bad idea. So, right now, Nancy Pelosi has just landed in the People's Republic of China, or Taiwan, depending on where your politics lie, officially recognized by the US currently as, you know, the one China, People's Republic of China. But this is a very, very difficult situation to talk about. Obviously, I know there's a lot of discussions that take place, and strangely amongst even sections of the left right now, where people will say that they are leftists, but they also want to uphold the desires and ambitions of the United States to stay as the world police, because that's in essence what the United States is. I'm not one of the people who thinks that US bad is the only way that you should basically understand geopolitics. I think that's absurd and childish and ridiculous. It's just at the moment the US is the most powerful hegemonic superpower by a long shot. They have the most military bases, over 800, the most conservative estimate. Other countries rank in at, like, you know, 2 or 3 for a place like China. One of the most well-known ones that China built is on Djibouti. But still, no one comes close to the United States in this kind of stuff. And when we're talking about other countries, especially as either Canadians or Americans or people who don't live there, my rule of thumb is typically to listen to what exactly is the will of the people. And when it comes to Taiwan and Taiwanese independence, they seem to want to consistently vote for the status quo, which is a complicated thing, I will grant you. But still, the idea has been for a long time not to rock that fragile relationship.
On July 5th, the White House posted this seemingly uncontroversial and unremarkable tweet, a list of places it had donated vaccines. It seemed like a banal government press release few would give much thought to. That is, until it was suddenly deleted, and for fear of causing an international incident, no less. See if you can find why. The problem was not the actual donation, nor was it the mere reference to Taiwan, a word the US government uses all the time, and nowhere in the tweet were the words country or nation. No, the concern was about this tiny flag, which the White House called an honest mistake. So fragile is this issue that merely tweeting an icon of a flag might be interpreted as a change in policy, or even a recognition of statehood, something that could trigger a military response by China. And yet, so too could deleting the tweet cause confusion. Afterward, the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry asked the US not to cause unnecessary speculation after its president and de facto ambassador were left retweeting a message now deleted. This was not the first such diplomatic mishap, nor, surely, will it be the last. The US government practices a strategy of deliberate ambiguity, leading much of the public, many in the media, and even a few politicians to misunderstand its position.
And by the way, I gotta say this, Taiwan has had such a history of colonization, whether it starts from the colonization that occurred on the behalf of China and the dynasties, then to the Dutch, who were setting up a whole bunch of different factories over there, and then to the Spaniards, who came on after the fact, and then the Dutch got pushed out, and then the Dutch came back, and then came Japanese imperialism, and oh boy, Japanese imperialism is fucking brutal. I don't know why they get such a historic pass on this one. Consistently, when you're talking about imperialism, you usually talk about British imperialism, which yes, was absolutely devastatingly horrific, and you talk about modern neo-imperialism, but why is Japanese imperialism always kind of left by the sidelines? Is it because like everyone sees Japan as very cute now, or I don't know what it is, why that's like a fact for anyone who loves history, but holy shit, that was brutal. That was an absolutely brutal period in their history.
Despite what China would have you believe, the US does not, in fact, adhere to the One China principle. Neither does it support Taiwanese independence, though it does have unofficial relations with its government. The reality is much more complicated. Sponsored by Morning Brew, the free daily newsletter I read to stay up to date. After the invasion of South Korea in the summer of 1950, did the Truman administration begin recognizing the strategic value of Taiwan. 4 years later, in 1954, the US signed a defense treaty, promising to protect Taiwan if attacked. This, along with America's refusal to recognize the PRC, lasted for another 25 years, until it discovered a bigger threat, the Soviet Union.
Commies.
Largely in response to the communists up north, America finally recognized the People's Republic in 1979 as the, quote, sole legal government of China.
By the way, this is important. The United States of America recognized the government of the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China.
It promised not to pursue a two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan solution, which meant ending official relations with Taiwan. It also stated, in a communique, the United States of America acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. Upon hearing this, you, like many people, might conclude that the US acquiesced to the People's Republic. But if so, you're not paying close enough attention. It recognizes the PRC as the sole legal government of China, but doesn't define what China is.
Oh, neat.
Remember, Taiwan is formally known as the Republic of China, and both claimed to be China. On the other hand, it merely acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. The key word here being acknowledge, which is not the same as accept or recognize. It does, however, give a similar impression, at least on a cursory reading. And this is certainly no accident. The American position then and now is to obfuscate, to narrowly satisfy China's stringent demands while giving up as little as possible in the process. The US could argue it fulfilled its obligations, while China could argue the US fully agreed to its position. A mutually enforced facade of resolution.
That's the best way of putting it. Mutually enforced facade of resolution. And the really tragic thing about all of this is, again, the Taiwanese people are going to be caught in the middle of this as two superpowers juggle who should have control. Like, the US is and has sold billions of dollars worth of weaponry. They are the world's largest arms dealer, and they've sold billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Taiwan in the past. And I believe personally they will continue to do so. And at the same time, it's this thing of instigation. If we push too far, is this going to provoke China to take some kind of dramatic action?
In reality, nothing said or done back in '79 truly resolved the issue. Both sides only kicked the can further down the road. And far worse than simply delaying that ugly conversation, the talks created the superficial illusion of agreement, leading to hurt feelings and accusations later on. In other words, America spoke as vaguely as possible, which China gladly exploited. The Chinese translation of the document, for example, uses a word closer in meaning to recognize, despite there being an accurate translation of acknowledge available. It's quite possible that many in China and even Taiwan, most of whom read the document in Chinese, believe the US promised more than it actually did. That was, after all, kind of the point. There's another similar linguistic misconception. The One China principle is the term for China's position, that Taiwan is a part of the People's Republic. This is not the same as generic lowercase one China policies, which every country has a different version of. When China accuses another country of violating the One China principle, it's really only saying that it disagrees with.
Oh, in the Dominion of Canada, the Canadian government takes note of this position of the Chinese government.
The action, not that the other country has broken a promise. Make no mistake, the US does not adhere to the principle, only to its own policy, one which has gone unchanged for over 40 years. Now, in the process of recognizing the People's Republic, the US ended its defense treaty with Taiwan, replacing it instead with the Taiwan Relations Act. The TRA was designed to reassure Taiwan by providing it with the weapons it needs to defend itself. And while it states an expectation that the issue will be resolved peacefully, it does not guarantee military support, only that the president will inform Congress of any potential threat, and then take appropriate action. Still, all parties operated under the assumption of eventual unification. All that changed in the 90s, as Taiwan transitioned from brutal authoritarian rule to what is today one of the strongest and most vibrant democracies on Earth. The process was neither smooth nor easy, and made advocating for independence legal, complicating the situation. Today, the future status of Taiwan is still the primary issue that divides parties. On one side are the Blues, who favor closer economic ties to China. China buys nearly half of Taiwan's exports, which they see as a critical relationship to maintain. To them, China is less an adversary and more a business partner. The dominant party in this camp is the Kuomintang, or KMT. On the other side are the Greens, led by the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP. Greens see trade with China as a dangerous dependency that leads to economic coercion. They prefer the term Taiwan to the Republic of China. But while the KMT is sometimes sloppily labeled pro-unification and the DPP pro-independence, this is simply not true. In reality, both sides agree that maintaining the status quo is the best short to medium-term strategy, and neither side, except for a few radicals, advocates unification or independence.
And that's like one of the most crucial parts about all this, because again, if we're watching this entire thing from other countries and then just playing this weird geopolitical game of chess where it's like, well, this is in the best interest of the people, it's what they want. No, the people actually want independence. No, they want unification. No, at the end of the day, they want to be a part of Greater China. No, they would like to be completely independent but be supported and propped up by the United States. Like, what are we doing? That's one of my biggest issues with looking at the lens of geopolitics through what should you be doing? What should I make you do as an independent nation, right?
The Greens argue Taiwan is already an independent sovereign state, and thus has no reason to declare independence, something which would surely start a war. None of this is meant to discount the ferocity of Taiwanese politics. Healthy democracy is fierce and messy, but to highlight how subtle their differences. This graph helps put things in perspective. When asked their preferences, the Taiwanese public has answered remarkably consistently for 20 years. The top 3 responses are all maintain the status quo, and only differ in the long term. 28% prefer to decide at a later date, 27% wish to maintain the status quo indefinitely, and 1/4 wish to maintain the status quo but move toward independence. Only a small minority wish to unify immediately, move toward unification, or declare independence as soon as possible. Ironically, it's most often Americans halfway across the globe who panic when China flies fighter jets through Taiwanese airspace, not the Taiwanese public, for whom such shows of intimidation have become mundane. Most are content simply keeping things as they are. As is the United States. Officially, it does not support independence. But remember, American diplomats are precise in their meaning. The US does not say it opposes independence, which would mean taking a position. But while it does not take a stance on the outcome, it does advocate for the process. Not only does it oppose a forceful unification by China, so too does it oppose a unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan, something that would also destabilize the region. When Taiwan's president proposed a public referendum on independence in 2003, the US was caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, it did not support what it perceived as dangerous antagonizing.
The aerial footage, holy shit.
On the other,
so
it did
gorgeous.
not want to publicly oppose a legal democratic process. Instead, it reiterated, indirectly but unequivocally, that it did not support independence, sending the message that the president had crossed a line. Since then, Taiwanese officials have gone out of their way to prove they don't plan on rocking the boat. In 2018, current President Tsai Ing-wen stayed silent on a referendum calling for its Olympic name to be changed from Chinese Taipei to Taiwan. And she's in the green camp. Every major politician today understands the need to proceed with caution, repeating, sometimes monotonously, that they won't pursue independence. That doesn't stop China from claiming they support independence, however, which engenders nationalism at home and helps narrow the boundaries of what's acceptable. But things can't continue like this forever. While America and Taiwan support the status quo for now, everyone agrees it's untenable in the long term. One of the 3 red lines China says the crossing of which would trigger an attack is if Taiwan refuses to ever consider negotiating unification. The possibility of change, however minuscule, is thus imperative to maintaining the peaceful status quo. The question is, in what direction does time favor? In terms of public opinion, the answer is clear. When broken down by age, it's evident that younger generations feel an increasingly strong Taiwanese identity distinct from China. The 2014 Sunflower Movement demonstrated how determined young people are, which recent developments in Hong Kong will surely only convince them of more so. And yet, every day China's military and economy grow stronger. It may believe time is on its side, that the balance of power will only shift in its favor. Likewise, does it surely notice America's growing disinterest in acting as the world's police force? China may doubt the will of Americans to fight a war so distant at a time when it's so preoccupied at home. In the meantime, Taiwan is stuck in a historically unprecedented limbo. A weird in-between state in which it can enjoy freedom only if it pretends not to. A status quo that has somehow survived 8 American administrations, 40 years, and yet can suddenly be called into question with a mere icon of a flag in a tweet. You may wonder where I find the ideas for these videos. Instead of reading traditional news, which is too often dry, sensationalist, and irrelevant, I try to consume less but higher quality news, and today.
All right, so that's a pretty good rundown of the history of it. Now, let's look to what the President of the United States is saying on this trip. Biden, military say Pelosi Taiwan trip is not a good idea. President Joe Biden said on Wednesday that the U.S. military officials believe it's not a good idea for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to visit Taiwan at the moment. Biden's comments coming in exchange with reporters came after a day after the Chinese Foreign Ministry said it would take resolute and strong measures should Pelosi proceed with reported plans to visit Taiwan in the coming weeks. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think China is going to launch an all-out military campaign against either Taiwan or the United States based solely on Nancy Pelosi visiting. It's just one of those, why? Why? You know? Like, we said the same thing about Trump. Do you remember this fucking headline that was all over the place when Trump just made a phone call? Donald Trump's call with Taiwan is coming in 1 second. Donald Trump's call with Taiwan president was no surprise official. The unprecedented conversation between Trump and President Tsai Ing-wen could enrage China and strain ties between the two powers. So when Trump's doing it, the Republicans, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's bad. Don't do that. Don't rock the boat, okay? We have very clear policies and measures. But when it's Nancy Pelosi, suddenly it's a different story. A phone call between President Donald Trump and Taiwan's leader that risks damaging relations between the U.S. and China was prearranged, a top Taiwanese official told NBC News on Saturday. Trump, who lambasted China throughout the election campaign and promised to slap 45% tariffs on Chinese goods, tweeted that the president, Tsai Ing-wen, had called him. Maintaining good relations with the United States is important as maintaining good relations with across the Taiwan Strait, Taiwanese president spokesman Alex Huang told the NBC News. Both are in line with Taiwan's national interest. He added that the call had not been a surprise. The conversation represented a stark break in U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. had not made diplomatic relations with Taiwan since 1979, when it recognized the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government. China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, and the two have nearly gone to war 3 times since 1949. The call was one in a series of talks with controversial global figures, including some of those countries that are considered in China's direct sphere of influence, such as the Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. According to state officials, the president-elect was not briefed by the agency ahead of the call to the Philippines president, nor before any of the calls to the world leaders since the election. So when this happened, I just remember seeing it all over the news, myself getting very, very scared because I was like, oh, come on, Trump, don't rock the boat. Chinese warplanes took to the skies and U.S. warships were on the move Tuesday as U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ignored warnings from Beijing, the Biden administration, and peace activists by becoming the highest-ranking American official in 25 years to visit Taiwan. Pelosi issued a statement insisting the congressional delegation's trip to the island that most of the international community, including the United States, considers part of China, in no way contradicts U.S. adherence to the One China policy, but rather honors American unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy. I mean, these are kind of conflicting statements. Our visit is part of a broader trip to the Indo-Pacific, including Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan, focused on mutual security, economic partnership, and democratic governance. She added, our discussions with Taiwan leadership will focus on reaffirming our support for our partner and on promoting our shared interests, including advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. America's solidarity with the 23 million people of Taiwan is more important today than ever, as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. Like, this is a pretty strongly worded statement to be making in the middle of all of this. China's Minister of Foreign Affairs declared the Pelosi visit, accused the United States of playing with fire, and warning that those who play with fire will perish by it. They said China and the United States are two major countries. The right way for them to deal with each other lies in our mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, non-confrontation, and win-win cooperation. The Taiwan question is purely an internal affair of China, and no other country is entitled to act as a judge on the Taiwan question. China strongly urges the United States to stop playing the Taiwan card and using Taiwan to contain China. It should stop meddling on Taiwan and interfering in China's internal affairs. It should stop supporting and conniving at Taiwanese independent separatist forces in any form. It should stop its act of saying that it's doing one thing but doing the complete opposite on the Taiwan question. Pelosi's visit is unnecessary, dangerous, and utterly reckless at a time when the war with Ukraine continues, the one that a handful of people have forgotten. Now, obviously, I think people who look at life through the lens of USA bad, and that's the only way they understand geopolitics, are going to be very short-sighted, as people who want to sound smarter than they do say it's a myopic worldview, and I don't think that's the way you should govern things. I think it is entirely unjust and horrifying what Putin is currently doing in Ukraine. That being said, a lot of people I find who are supporters of Ukraine kind of start and end their support of these kind of movements there. They're not the same people who are going to make a whole bunch of noise about, say, the struggle of Palestinians and say, well, we should be sending arms to Palestine as well to defend itself. Billions and billions of arms, because that system, which is recognized right now under Amnesty International as being a system of apartheid, is unjust, unfair, and is currently creating tons and tons of trouble. Or look domestically. Like I can say personally from my own experience, in Canada, for example, there is a land claim by the Wet'suwet'en people in northern BC that they have it's unceded land. They have never surrendered. They have a long-standing history of signing treaties with the Canadian government, and the Canadian government recognizing that they have sovereign control over their own lands, and then they'll send the RCMP into those territories. I mean, if you had people in Cuba saying that they were going to send delegates to Puerto Rico to support Puerto Rican independence from the United States, I'm sure a lot of people in the US would probably be pretty upset about that, would probably say a thing or two about that. Like, if your worldview, and you have to stay consistent on it, is not that might makes right, it's not that if a country is more powerful than another country, then it has the right to go in there, murder all the people who live there, and then stake claim as that land as their own. If you do not believe that is a fundamental principle, then there are a lot of internal battles going on. And in the United States, there is a lot of movement where there is a vast majority of indigenous people who are asking for land back title claims that, again, the United States originally agreed to, but are not following through. Why aren't people doing a whole bunch of activism for that in the same way that they would be doing activism for the sovereignty of Ukrainians, or in this case, the sovereignty they feel for people who live in Taiwan? It seems to be, well, this one happens to reflect, again, what the U.S. State Department might want and is willing to give money towards and funnel, versus what is a consistent rule on this for me to apply to over and over and over again. And I see this happening consistently, even in countries that the United States itself has invaded at one point or another. Like, if you believe in the sovereignty of the Iraq people, well, then was it justified for the U.S. to have done what they did, or in Afghanistan? And I'm not saying that those are now ongoing conflicts, but they are certainly quagmires in which I think the United States has a large responsibility to try and help and fix. Like, every single time there is a creation of this new terrorist sect that comes out of these, like, vacuums of power, all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, these people are very, very bad. They are very bad for the locals more than they are for anyone else. And yes, you don't want terrorism being exported on a mass scale, but at the same time, what is creating these? What is creating Al-Qaeda? What is creating ISIS, ISIS-K, all these other variants that come out of it? Where's the origin story of these? Pelosi slams China in op-ed published minutes before she lands in Taiwan. We cannot stand by. Like, I'm sorry, but she's taking very strong words on a trip that her own administration, the Biden administration, is saying this is a bad idea. Pelosi was originally scheduled to visit in April, but had to postpone after she tested positive for COVID. The U.S. has a long-standing commitment to the One China policy and recognizes Beijing as the government of China, but allows informal relations and defense ties with Taipei. China has stepped up its military provocations against democratic self-ruled Taiwan in recent years, as it looks to intimidate into accepting Beijing's demands to unify the communist mainland. Biden also said he expected to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping sometime in the last 10 days. Biden national security and economic aides are in the process of completing a review of the U.S. tariff policy and making recommendations to the president.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form, available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback, because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we are prepared to embark on a mighty jihad in your name. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble jester, attempting in vain to get you to laugh. To our valiant knights of the Round Table, Benji Arnie, Tech Tink, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Mayred, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood. It doesn't matter what I believe, it only matters what I can prove. Egbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Jenna Tao, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevbot, EXE, Brian Ephraim, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojack, Saren 42, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Agent NDN, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our mugs and salute our brave heroes off to another glorious conquest.